Hey guys, my name is Colson Rosa, and welcome back to Seraphim Stories. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about some of the important aspects of creative writing and how it follows sort of a template or a framework in most of its stories. And this is just another thing that sets creative writing apart from both formal and nonfiction writing. And I want to talk not only why these aspects exist in the novels you're going to read or the movies you're going to see, but also and how authors can use these stories to affect the lives of their readers. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is plot. Now, plot is just a fancy term that talks about the story, what happens, what's going on to the characters. Now, this might seem the most obvious of all of the different aspects, but this sets it apart not only from poetry, but also from a lot of academic writing, is that there's a very specific narrative. There's a story that follows from point A to point B to point C, and it continues. Now, some authors will kind of play around with this idea, with this concept, and directors will do the same thing. Like in the movie Dunkirk, directed by Christopher Nolan, it tells the story in a very strange way by having several different storylines happening at the same time. And sometimes you jump forward in time, sometimes you jump backward in time. But overall, there's always a narrative being followed, even if it's done in an unconventional manner. And I can release a later video on how to write a good plot, the ways in which plot can fall short or really live up to telling a gripping story. But right now I just want to focus on how plot affects us as a reader. And I think it almost goes without saying that if the story isn't intriguing, it can lose us very quickly. It's just a natural tendency of the human mind to wander, even when watching a movie. And that's something that the author actively needs to avoid. They need to create a story that keeps moving, but also doesn't move too fast, or else the reader could get lost and confused, and without enough description, they don't know the actual scene that they're being placed in. But it's easy for people to overthink their story and overthink, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? But we're going to talk a little bit later about characters, and I think the story and the characters go hand in hand, so that even if there's a little bit of a slower moment in the story, you don't need to worry about it, because that can be building up the characters, developing them, causing the reader to love them even more than they already did. And plot is so important because we naturally, without even knowing we're doing it, are going to look at a story and compare it to our own lives. We're going to ask questions like, what if I was in that situation? Would I react the same way? Would I struggle with the same things our protagonist is struggling with? And would I want to be the main character? Would I want to be the villain? Would I want to be the love interest, or so many other characters that are important to the storyline? Now, not all characters have to be the same. They're most often not, and that's a good thing. But there are many different types of storylines that also can be very different. Every story has to have a plot line running through it, but it can be anything from a redemption story where you're overcoming the odds, to a story of returning back home where you're coming back to where you started because you wandered so far away, or just to a story of accomplishing something where the character has a goal and they want to do something, and the struggle comes in whether or not they get it done. And when we're talking about characters, I think it's important to notice that these characters have flaws, but they also have admirable attributes that make them engaging. Even some of the bad characters, if you can relate to them in some way, you can feel like you understand, at the very least, where they're coming from. Just like we naturally look at stories and compare them to our own lives, we're going to look at characters and say, do I know somebody like that? Is one of my friends like that? One of my family members? And we can learn to compare in a good, positive light how characters think, how they act, to what is good and natural about how they should be responding to any given situation. And that brings me to my next point, which is setting. Now, setting is where everything takes place, where all the magic happens. And setting doesn't have to be a sci-fi planet, even though there are some excellent stories told in that setting. Setting can be a backyard. Setting can be any country on the globe. It's just any place and time that a given thing is happening. So there are many different places that a story can happen, but sometimes it can be hard to pick. Where do you want your story to go? Do you want it to go far beyond the comfort zones of your character, or do you want it to be more personable, more relatable, and happen in a place people are familiar with? Now, there's excellent examples of both, so I don't think you need to worry too specifically about if you're going to pick the perfect setting as far as your readers being somewhat interested in it. But what you do need your setting to do is you need it to build the world up that they're in. Give details, give explanation, but even better, show the setting more than just talk about it. Show the characters going through this setting. Why does it matter that they're in this time period? How does that affect the technology that they use? How does that affect the architecture, even the buildings they see, the places they go? Because setting sets almost the background, the skeleton, you could say, to the person. It sets the core foundation, because if the setting's off and it seems like the story shouldn't be taking place where it is, or it seems like you don't know enough about where the world even is, then that can be really hard for a reader to process. Now, different stories are going to deal with setting differently. If you're in something like a mystery, you may not have to worry very much about where it takes place, because a mystery can take place almost anywhere. But if you're in something like a fantasy world, the reader needs to know, how does this world work? What are the creatures in this world? What are the characters in this world? What type of structure does it even have? Because when you're inventing a new world, it can seem kind of formless and void if it doesn't have a structure to the society, to the way things are working in that culture. And there's two dangers. There's a danger to making it far too much like our world, and it doesn't even seem different. And there's a danger to making it too out of the box that it almost doesn't make any sense. And I want to return to an idea I previously mentioned, which is regarding the storyline, the problems that the characters have to face. Now, it's commonly understood that there needs to be a dilemma in the stories. There needs to be a problem. That could be anything from not being able to figure out who committed the crime, to not being able to conquer a certain enemy, to not being able to pass a school exam. But there needs to be a conflict that is continually upheld, or if one conflict gets resolved, a new one needs to get introduced, because that's where the tension comes in. If a story doesn't have any tension, then people can wonder where it's going. People can wonder, why are we reading about this story when it just seems like normal everyday life and nothing important is happening? And that's what tension serves to do. And it also serves to get your reader thinking about, why is this a problem? What brought this problem about? Could it have been avoided? How can it be solved? And when this problem is getting solved, usually there's an overarching problem that spans the whole length of the book or the movie. And with this problem, when it's getting solved, it needs to have a build-up, a climax, and a resolution. So what does that mean? Build-up is the start. It's the beginning. It's how everything began. Now, naturally, it needs to explain the world, explain what's going on, but it doesn't need to be dry and boring. So a lot of people have a lot of problems with the build-up because they say, let me just get to what's really happening. But they don't realize that the build-up is crucial to set the tone, set the themes, set everything you're going to care about, to make these characters matter, to make you want to root for these characters no matter the cost, or to make you question these characters. Why are they living the lives that they're living? That's not a wrong question to ask. And the build-up helps set all of these themes. And I think that can be most clearly illustrated in a mystery novel, where if you don't have a good build-up, none of the clues are going to be properly laid, and the payoff is going to feel cheap. It's going to feel like the mystery never could have been solved without plot convenience and luck. But that's not what you want at all. Leading up to the climax, the build-up then promotes everything about the world that we want to save and everything in this world we want to lose. We want the characters to be free of. And that leads us to the climax. Now, the climax is the point of no return. It's not always the largest moment in the story, though it often is. It's often the pinnacle of the action or the pinnacle of the emotional stakes, where at this moment you know whatever choice is made, whatever happens, there's no going back. And the climax needs to be engaging, which may not sound hard to do. If this is the most important moment in the story, then it should be easy to sell your reader on it, right? Well, not necessarily. People are so used to excellent climaxes that they need to know that this dramatic moment is checking all the right boxes, and that's going to be different for each story. For a romance, it needs to check the emotional box where the characters come to the end of themselves and really are faced with the question, is this going to work? And whether one character has a crush on another or they're both trying to figure out if this is going to work, rubber has to hit the road eventually, and they have to make that decision. If it's something like an action-adventure story, I think even of Indiana Jones, where you get that climax where you are standing up against a villain. Now, usually in Indiana Jones's case, it's a villain surrounded by a horde of henchmen. But he's faced with the problem. Do I give up, let them have the artifact, and try to escape? Or do I fight for it? Do I find a clever way to break out of the normal, the natural, and find a route of escape? And that's what he does so well. And after the climax, after this turning point, you then head toward the resolution. Now, you don't have to head toward the resolution immediately. The story doesn't have to end right after the climax. But you need to start winding up the story, tying up the loose ends, fulfilling the character arcs where characters have grown and changed and become better, or have stuck to their guns and become more solid and firm in the person they already were. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before ending the video is themes. Almost all stories have themes, but that can be kind of vague. What exactly does that mean? It means that they have ideals that are present throughout the story. The ideal could be truth, it could be friendship, it could be staying faithful to the person you love, it could be hope, it could be despair. Not all themes have to be positive, but it's good sometimes to have a negative theme that people can wrestle through, come to grips with. The theme could be good versus evil. And no matter what theme it is, it needs to be woven throughout the entire story. It needs to feel important, and it needs to feel real to the characters. The characters may or may not realize they're in a story, but they realize what's at stake, and they realize what they need to do, whether it's to band together or to go it alone, whether it's to protect the ones they care about or protect themselves from the danger coming upon them or the danger they're bringing on themselves. So, some of the most important stories that we've seen throughout history have major relevant themes that are tied throughout the story like clockwork. And that's part of the reason why we love them so much. We leave them with a real sense of the author's view of that given topic, and we can then analyze it. And we can then come to grips with, do we like the author's portrayal of that theme? How do we want to handle that theme in our own lives? And how do we want to change the world little by little with the things that we do when it comes to these given topics or these given problems that our characters have had to face? Well, guys, I hope you loved the video, and I really want to talk more about these topics to you to let you know how to study things like plot and characters and setting, and how to work them into your story, how to recognize characters that work and don't work, how to recognize stories that are told well and not told well, and how to love them more because of it. So I hope you guys keep writing, I hope you guys keep reading, and really loving each part of the story for its own weight, for its own value. And if you guys want to check out my stories, you can find them in the link below. And I would love to hear your thoughts about what I could even grow in as an author when it comes to these characteristics of fiction writing. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments, why do you think these are so crucial to fiction writing? Is there any one factor you don't think is needed, or you think could be expressed in a different way that maybe breaks the mold from typical stories? So thank you guys so much, and I hope you love the video.